Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, that is Connor, and we are going to talk about the Queen's Gambit, episode 6. It's called Adjournment. So, full spoilers for the episode, and you're probably wondering, why was it so goddamn long between episodes 5 and 6? Well, let me tell you, we actually recorded half of this review about almost 2 weeks ago now, probably, and there was a tech issue. It was a dud. Everything we'd done was useless, and then we had 2 weeks where we had heavily reduced nights to record, so it kept getting pushed, and here we are. So we're finally going to talk about episode 6. So we actually did half of this like 2 weeks ago, but it's been the good thing about it being 2 weeks though is that it's easier to have the conversation again without feeling we just had it.
I barely remember what we said.
Yeah, because whenever there's been and it doesn't happen too often, but whenever we've had a tech issue in the past and we've had to just start again after doing some or half, or in some cases most of the recording, is that it's very difficult to pretend to flow through the conversation naturally because we feel like we're just repeating points. So that may be the upside to it, but regardless, we're here. This is the episode where Beth hits absolute rock bottom in many ways. Well, in the back half of the episode specifically.
Yeah, the first half she's doing pretty good.
The first half is kind of almost on a path to kind of excellence, I guess, in some ways. In the sense that she's getting better at chess, she's being more sober, largely through the influence of Benny.
She's getting better at chess while being sober.
Yes. But then it all comes crashing down when she gets drunk and sleeps in for the game, which finally brings us back to the start of the show and how it opened. I guess I have a slight critique here, and I don't necessarily know if we needed that tease at the start of the show. I feel like now that we've actually gotten to where that comes from in the story, I kind of feel underwhelmed that it was just this moment.
I'm not, but only because I think we even said at the time they put that scene in just so we had Anya Taylor-Joy in the first episode. Otherwise, she wouldn't be there. It was that was the only reason. It was just a framing device, and they had to pick something. That's
really all it is. And I think the reason why I feel like it doesn't fit as a tease for what's going to happen later is that this incident where our new friend Cleo, she meets her in Paris where the chess tournament's happening, and we'll get to all the stuff before that, because she meets her in this episode with Benny earlier on. But this incident feels less like a culmination of something to me and more like the start of a turning point. And because of that, teasing it at the start of the story feels a bit odd to me. It feels like, I don't know.
I get where you come from. I think I did, because it depends on how you view it. Because it is, I would say, a culmination of her journey in this direction. And like I say, it's also a turning point, because this is like, no, this is, you have to, swing back from this now. But it's a culmination in the sense that, no, this is as bad as she gets. So that's why it's the tease at the start, right? It's like, no, this is how terrible it's going to look for her. I wonder what it added though to like everything before it, because ultimately, I can tell you what it added, because the entire first 2 episodes we were talking about things through that lens of knowing that, oh no, she gets pretty bad with the drugs, and and it starts affecting a game, and we were picking up on the things and talking about the elements that it was kind of setting up and because we knew how bad it was going to get. It was like, it was prodding us to think of it in that direction.
I don't know if it needed to do that, though, because what I was saying there was not in relevance to the early episodes. I was talking about this episode. I think this episode's almost hurt by that scene at the start of the show, because, everything was happening, and I know, obviously, there's a talent in certain stories to building towards the tragedy, right, when you know tragedy's coming, but I don't really know if knowing that she was going to mess up this game actually added anything to me for the scenes leading up to the the incident in the night where she sleeps in and gets drunk. And the only thing that was sort of needed to be answered from the night itself was who was in the bed, which turned out to be Cleo.
Which was never really a question at the time. We just assumed that could have been anyone, right?
Yeah, we didn't really care. It wasn't a huge deal.
I wonder if part of the problem is, did you know going at what point in the episode did you know, oh, this is that moment? Because it wasn't until that morning for me that it really clocked. There was nothing beforehand where I went, oh, is this the what? Because I'll be honest, I'd kind of forgotten about that first scene. There was nothing there going, oh, this is the one, until it started. I was like, oh, okay, we're doing that.
I can't remember if it was the hotel or just the fact that we were in Paris, but early on I just kind of felt like this was it. This is what we're building to. And
I obviously didn't remember the details well enough.
Yeah, I think also just the placement as well. It's the penultimate episode. You know, we have one after this to wrap things up. It felt right that we had to get to that point, because unless you're going to end on a really down note where she's just lost everything and that's just the end of the story.
No, I get that. I will be honest though, my initial reaction when it cut to that scene, I was like, oh, we're doing this, was, I kind of thought we'd done this already. Like I just assumed we'd had it.
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is, it's not so much that they shouldn't have teased, because like you said, we looked at certain things through a lens because of knowing where she ends up. But I don't think the game and her sleeping in was the thing to tease. I think maybe the thing to tease would be some of her sort of binge afterwards where she's just a mess. That would have given us the addiction, it would have given us these things. But knowing she was going to sleep in specifically and lose the game this way...
I don't think we knew she was going to lose the game, because if I remember,
or well, not lose the game,
it cuts away right as she gets there and they start the game.
Okay, sure, but that doesn't change my point, though.
Sure.
That's whatever. But the point being is that this incident of her sleeping in, instead of being like, oh shit, this is how it's going to happen, it was, well, we always knew this was going to happen. Seeing her at her lowest afterwards, when she's just like boozing herself to near death in the house, like just a couple of quick moments of that perhaps might have been the better thing to tease.
I kind of understand where you're coming from,
because the reason why
in a lot of ways I disagree.
But the reason why I'm saying that though, because then we say, how does she get to that point? What happens to trigger this much of a thing? But instead, we tease what the trigger was in the first place.
I do get what you're saying, but for me, I actually quite like this being the opening scene. Not necessarily in context of this episode. It's kind of... it's almost irrelevant in this episode. It was more just okay, we're there. But I like it for everything before this, because I don't think I'd have wanted to see just how bad she was afterwards at the start. Because at the bit at the start, it was like, okay, she's a bit of a mess, but it presented it in like a... kind of like a rock star way, almost. You know, like where they'll go out party, you know, they'll still turn up and do the show. And this was kind of what that first scene presented at the time, where, no, she was a mess, she's running late, there's clearly drugs involved, she's in a random hotel, but then she gets to the game, and we don't see how it goes, and for all we know, at that moment, she pulls out the victory. And I think in that lens, I prefer that, having that, the potential of, well, you know, we don't know how this goes going forward, as opposed to just seeing the mess.
Yeah, but it's not like the mess is the end of the story either. There's still, where does this go from there? Like,
no, I know. I think I specifically like the idea, the more ambiguous, that you know, the rock star vibe that it had. You know, just cutting that scene out of context. I think I like that more personally.
Yeah, I think the problem is here is that you're viewing it from what it does to episode 1. I'm viewing it from what it does to this episode. And for me, when it gets to this section where, oh, this is her waking up, I felt like, and this is otherwise, I'm not trying to shit in the episode too much, because I actually think there's a lot of good stuff before this scene. I think there's some good stuff after this scene. I just think when I got to this moment, I felt nothing from it. I didn't feel like, oh, we're finally here. I didn't, oh, that's who's in the bed. Like, I didn't care.
I agree with all of that. I think that the reason I keep kind of framing it through from the start up to this point is because, like I say, I don't care about how it affects this. You know, when I got to the scene, I didn't really care about, oh, it's that scene. I was like, we're doing that scene. But I was just engrossed with the rest of the story that was out of my mind immediately. And I wasn't thinking about how, oh, you know, how this impacted, you know, this moment in particular. It was just, this was just the next moment, and it happened to be a curiosity as though this was what they chose to cut out. I didn't feel like it affected my viewing of this episode at all.
It was a downbeat for me, but the first half of the episode kind of boils down to two important things. One is the comparison of her own life with Benny's, because she goes to New York with Benny. She sees his apartment, which she thinks is going to... Because when they're driving into New York, she looks at the city and it's like, oh, we're entering the big city, the sparkling, she's never been here before, it's this magical moment. And then when they get to his place, it's, no, we're going downstairs. Or we're going downstairs again. Oh, yes, this little basement, this is my place. And Like, he has nothing. He doesn't even have a couch, but he's got one little shelf with all of his trophies, and like the idea being that he was the US champion, he's one of the best in the world, and this is how he's living. Now, admittedly, yes, like maybe he just chooses to live like this because he's always traveling, so he doesn't give a shit, rather than because he can't afford to live any better. But I think it's something that, you know, a lot of this episode for her thematically is, at least in the first half, is about what can her life be beyond chess, or what can her life be with chess fueling it, essentially. Like, what, you know, what else is there for her? And that's something that then this other part that's important is this new friendship with Cleo, who's this fashion designer who works with models. I don't think she actually was a model herself, was she?
I think she is, yeah.
She kept talking about them being vapid.
Yeah, I think that was the point. She was talking about, like, all her and her colleagues. It was kind of like an ironic thing for a lot of it, I thought.
Maybe you're right, but I thought she was just a fashion designer. But anyway, she is, you know, talking about her lifestyle. She's so just kind of like flippant about everything. And she's almost like she's both a good and a bad influence on Beth in different ways. But when she runs into her in Paris, and I say runs into her, she specifically comes to see her at the hotel because she knows she's there. She tries to talk to her about love, about sex, about fashion, about what her lifestyle, what she wants to do. And Beth starts talking about, I want to eat in a different cafe every day. I want to live this glamorous lifestyle. I want to be all this. But it's all very kind of shallow. And what's interesting about it is it kind of completely clashes with something that happens in the second half of the episode. Not just the fact that she crashes and burns and it goes into a bit of a drinking binge and whatnot, but more specifically the scene where the foster father tries to take back the house because he's changed his mind.
And she's having none of it.
Yeah, she fights for it. She just says, "No, I'll just buy the house. Because she can do that now. I'll just buy it. Right? We'll just end it. But I'm deducting the funeral costs, you prick." As a kind of an add-on to that.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really good scene because, you know, particularly when she says, "You can't even look at me," like, because she keeps trying to prod him into like responding and getting the conversation going, and he just won't look at her. But yeah, so the first.
I love at the end of that as well, though. The lawyer's just like, "Well, my work here's done."
Oh yeah, I guess that sells it. But yeah, the first half, you know, she does eventually have sex with Benny, even though Benny explicitly said that was not going to happen. But he clearly changes his mind. He eventually is attracted to her. I mean, maybe he was always attracted to her, but he's eventually tempted, I suppose, to initiate some romance. Yeah. Which has some jokes. She gets mad at him because he starts talking about chess moves like right after they're done. Like literally within seconds of finishing, he's like, "Yeah, what about this chess move?"
I think it's a great parallel though with how she was with Beltic.
Yeah.
Where she was the one where immediately it was just like she didn't really care. She was thinking about chess the whole time that she was with him.
Well, yeah, because there's a couple of things there. One is that everything with Benny is that Benny just thinks about chess nonstop. Like, he wants to start playing chess moves and getting her to improve right away, and she's like, "No, I want breakfast first." And that's me glossing over all the air mattress, you know, comedy, I suppose, if you want to call it that, and so on. And you know, that's all he thinks about, you know. And again, that comes up in the post-sex scene. And to go back to the Beltic stuff, is that, you know, he kind of hit this ceiling. And he kind of realised that this wasn't as much for him anymore. Like, he was kind of like done with chess. He'd reached this natural end point. And for him, it was probably the right choice. He went, and as we see later in this episode, he's went and found a life that suits him better. There's a line later on where he said, you know, because she mentions, "Oh, you got a different car." And he says, "Yeah, this one suits me better." And it's like he's kind of accepted who he is. And he's a much happier, content
he's
person.
Like working in a store and he's just quite content.
Yeah. And I think it's not so much that Beth isn't or shouldn't be a better chess player, isn't that she shouldn't go on and be the best. It's that she's at a point where it's starting to be very difficult and she's questioning, is this actually for me or isn't it? It's not so much that one is right and one is wrong, or that she knows that one is right and one is wrong. She doesn't know is kind of the point, I think. So seeing Benny's life and examining it and sort of questioning that, and then seeing Cleo's life and comparing, oh, like, her life actually seems very appealing to me right now. It's very glamorous, it's very this and it's very that.
Yeah.
And then Cleo, of course, almost, I mean, not intent, I don't think she's trying to sabotage Beth, but in a way kind of does, by kind of invading her life the night before this chess game.
She's like, "Come on, come have a drink, go on."
Yeah.
And I have to assume no one told Cleo that she has a bit of a problem. Obviously, there's the scene where her and the two guys do come around to Benny's, and they offer Beth a drink, and she's like no, very pointedly, and Benny looks on approvingly, but that's about it. And I don't know if maybe she just didn't pick up on it, that there was a history there, because I doubt anyone would have mentioned it after that.
Yeah. And like Benny does care about her. When she comes back from the disgrace game, because obviously she sleeps in, she loses the game. And it's kind of this really pathetic loss where the whole time, like, Bargov kind of knows. And even the way he's looking at her to work, because there's a moment, maybe it was last episode, but there was a moment where she speaks in Russian briefly at a press conference. And it's kind of like he's like, oh, she's bringing their A game this time. Like, he's impressed. And it's
he's
this kind of
disappointed that there's no challenge.
Yeah, and it's this kind of sad moment where he's almost feeling pity for her because she's kind of crashing and burning. And when she goes back, Benny calls her on the plane and says, look, you shouldn't be alone right now. Come back to New York. I'll help you. I'll just be there. And then later on when he phones her again, he's like, hey, like, I miss you. And he throws that in the middle of a conversation, which is mostly about chess, and it's mostly about the fact that some Bible group wants to, like, pay for her trip to Russia for the next tournament because they want to spread the word of God to various countries. And Benny's like, yeah, take all their money. Just say you'll do it. It's fine. They'll pay for it all. They'll even pay for me to go too. Just mention me.
If you say I'm your coach, they'll just take it. It's fine. Do it.
But of course, this is going on while she's going on her absolute binge, just crashing and burning. We get essentially a montage of her, like, dropping booze bottles, on the pavement as she's trying to take out the trash, and, like, the neighbors are, like, judging her. And she gets invited. The big culmination of the episode. Well, not quite the end, but just before. I'd say the big culmination in terms of a dramatic point, which is where, because Beltic is trying to see her because he's concerned. He kind of knows that she's going through a hard time. He's obviously heard what's happened with the game.
He's very genuine about this as well.
Yeah,
like, there's nothing weird about this from his side. He's just, like, genuinely worried about her.
Yeah, he comes to try and see her a couple of times, but she doesn't answer the door. Tries to call her. And eventually she is invited to go back to where she won the very first tournament she went to, back in, like, episode 2 it must have been.
2, yeah.
And she's forgotten about agreeing to do this, and she puts on makeup to try and, like, hide, like, how much of a wreck she is, and she looks honestly disturbing. Like, I was disturbed by this visual with the drawn on eyebrow. It was just she like drawn stuff under her eyes as well. It was weird. Like,
people do that.
It was a whole thing. It was weird, and she has all these people telling her all these great things about her. Particularly that one girl who was inspired by her, who was there in the tournament that day, and Beth is just being kind of this asshole rock star style, like, drop
the
out
whole time, because they're like, oh, can you come an hour early to do pictures, and she's just like, I'll be there half an hour early. You don't need any more than that. It's really short and just like no, she does it her way. She has no time for it, and this is where Baltic gets a chance to see her outside, and basically talks about how his dad had a drinking problem, and he basically recognized the signs. Like, he could tell that she had something that was kind of growing, and perhaps when he heard what happened, I assume the press at this game, talked about her walking in late, talked about her being kind of disheveled. I assume that he is sort of seeing this and going, oh, it's gotten worse. Like, whatever I was recognizing her, I'm seeing the payoff. It's affecting her now.
Yeah. And Benny as well. The fact that he was so adamant about, oh, there's no booze here, at the start of the episode, and kind of making a point of, like, and she's very defensive and says, I didn't think there would be, is her response. People around her are clearly recognizing this and are trying to, like, offer help in various ways. Benny invites her to come stay with him again, and she refuses. She wants to go back to the house. Beltic's coming round to try and be there. And
again, I do think it's important to note that Cleo is not being vicious or anything like that.
No.
I do think she genuinely just like, hey, you could do a loosening up. Like, come and have a drink, just have a drink as friends, it'll be good for you. I do think that's what she does think she's doing.
Yeah, there's not really much Cleo after.
No.
After the night of, I suppose. It's a whole thing, and it's actually really sad. Like what Beltic, because Beltic's not trying to get her to admit to anything. He isn't either to. He just knows, and she's so used to like trying to pretend or denying what she's doing or what she's going through, and it ties in with the the adopted mother as well. All this stuff, like she's kind of following in her footsteps in a really unhealthy way, which led to a pretty early death. So like we see where this leads. We see where this path leads for people in this show, and so it's very sad where he basically says that he's there for her and he hopes she does better, and offers friendship. And it's just a little distressing, and because it ends with the principal of the school who's invited her here comes out and yells her back inside at the end of the scene. Yeah.
And Beltic's attitude is very much where we are, because we know this is just a limited series. This could end badly. There doesn't have to be a happy ending, but we're on his side. Like we see where this is going, and we're hoping that it doesn't.
Yeah, you're hoping she'll turn it around, and I can almost see them pulling a Rocky, where she doesn't win this game with Borgov, this final game with Borgov. But she gives a fight. Like she almost wins.
I would say more importantly, she does it sober.
Maybe even literally gets a draw. But maybe that's even because you can actually draw in chess. You can't draw in boxing. But maybe that's how they wrap this up. And it's like, no, it's not so much that she's the best yet. Maybe it's sort of this thing where, well, maybe she will be next year, but that's okay because the story's ending because she's gotten over her demons. We don't need to see it anymore. That's the point of the story. I can see
that being the case, yeah.
They can never win. I mean, it'll work either way, but that's assuming it's a happier ending.
Right. Like I say, there is no guarantee of that. I think we're hoping and kind of assuming, because that's the storytelling default, is still give a happy ending, but there is absolutely no guarantee of that.
Yeah, because I mean, the story, this could be a story about the dangers, and even if it's a happy ending, it's still about that, I suppose. But if it really wants to hit home the dangers of the cycles that repeat and the influences of those around her, and because she's had good influences, she's had bad influences, and some of them have come from really unlikely places. The good influence of a janitor, for example, the good influence of, surprisingly, I mean, she had obviously kind of a shitty encounter with the college guy, but both Beltic and Benny have been kind of positive relationships in her life in different ways.
Yeah, I think Benny in particular is notable because he was introduced to the bad boy of chess, right? And
he is the bad boy of chess.
He had this big image of no, he doesn't give a shit about anything, and he was the rock star that that it presented her to be in many ways. But ultimately, he's been quite a good person and a very good influence in the long run, or he's tried to be anyway.
Yeah. Alternatively, there was the older guy who was, she was into from the first couple episodes that tried to hit on her in episode 3, and it kind of got a bit weird because even though she's technically just of age, it's like you met her when she was 14, you creep.
To be fair, so did Beltic and Betty.
Oh no, but Benny, because Benny didn't get introduced till episode 3, so she was already.
But it was before the time jump in episode 3, wasn't it?
I don't think so.
Okay, maybe not then. I'd have to double check.
Oh no, maybe it was. But okay, maybe that's a fair point. But
he barely knew her. I will acknowledge that his interaction was a lot more passing than the others.
Yeah, not only was interaction passing. I feel like by the time there's a romantic thing between them in this episode, they've gotten to know each other for quite a bit. At this age, and to be fair to Beltic, he was also a high school kid when he met her. He was a couple of years older, but he was still in high school, so the difference isn't that much. The point being was that guy in episode I think it was 3
significantly creepier than the others.
Yes, he was. That felt a bit more. I don't know. I honestly, it was more kind of the way he interacted with her in episode 2 when he first met her. That was a bit more. I don't want to say groomy, but there was a weird couple of stares where she's 14, dude. Stop it. Stop intensely looking at her. But the point I was making though is that Benny and Beltic are both in different ways really positive people in her life, and she kind of acknowledged that with Beltic, even though her kind of engagement with Beltic was very bad for him. And not intentionally from her, but it was quite unhealthy for him to stick around, and he sort of realised that, and that's why.
Thankfully he did, because otherwise you'd feel quite bad for him, I think.
Yeah. And I think Benny's an interesting sort of like counterpoint to Beltic in the sense that, unlike Beltic, he's very aware of what she is or who she is and the pitfalls of who she is. And that's why he was very adamant about his rules and things like that. He was kind of like calling things before they were happening, saying this is why this doesn't happen. This is why this. He's very strict about it. And something still blossomed out of it. But they're both like good people in our life in different ways. It is. It's almost funny that they might end up even like in a scene together next episode if we get some sort of intervention like team or something.
It's possible. Yeah.
It's very possible. Obviously, the episode ends. She gets back to the house. Because there's a scene where she goes to the... I don't know if this is right before the end or a little bit earlier. Like I say, it's been a while since we watched it now. But she goes to a restaurant by herself, and it's like to prove that she can have like a nice meal on her own in a nice restaurant.
It's just a little bit sad.
It's a little bit sad, but then like she's... And there's like a moment of hesitation before she maybe orders a drink, where she almost doesn't, and it's like, yeah, maybe she shouldn't. But then, she does order a drink, and then we cut to her stumbling home, and she can barely walk, and... I can only imagine what people in the restaurant are thinking as she can barely walk from her table when she's been sitting there on her own.
I mean, I don't know what it's like in America, but in Britain it would be everyone very awkwardly just pretending it's not happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds about right. About right.
Just pretend she's not there. Just keep eating, keep chatting like normal.
Yes. So the episode ends though with the shocking return of her friend from the orphanage, who we've not seen since early episode 2, really. Yeah. So, who again, I mean, she's grown up as well, and we have no idea what she's doing with her life now. We have no idea. She looks in a much healthier place than Beth does right now. So
it's a pretty low bar, admittedly.
Yeah. So maybe this sort of jolt from her past, it'll be something that's very healthy for her, which obviously was what the cliffhanger is kind of implying. Yeah. So I'm very curious. A little
visit from the janitor just to shock her back into it.
It's so funny. I think one thing I will, because I mean, like I say, as much as I complained about the scene that was teased from back in episode 1, I do think a lot of that first half stuff with Benny, all the little things it was doing to show what his life is like, how she's kind of analysing his life, about the emptiness of his basement apartment, about how the fact that he has no furniture, all these things, to the temptation of the glamorous life and what that actually represents to her. Does that just mean having unlimited booze and stuff? Is that all she's really thinking? Is it more than that? Is she pretending to herself that it's without that, and then she falls into the trap of going down that again? It's
so interesting that Benny literally treats it like a religion, like a monk who has to give up all their belongings.
He does actually, yeah. He's a chess monk. He's the bad boy of chess, but he's also the chess monk.
Yeah, it's so different to her, where it's not actually in a lot of ways it's not about the chess. It's about the lifestyle.
There's a joke in here about Beth and the chess monks as a title for this show. Beltic could be the second chess monk, and then we did a third one to go with, to make the Elven trio complete. It just occurred to me that chess monk and chipmunk were very close. Yeah, and then the stuff when she's at her bottom in the back half of the episode is also very strong. But I think what I want to say here is that, and I just realised this as I've been talking about this, is that talking about Beltic, talking about Benny, talking about other characters in the show.
It's a lot of B names, isn't there?
That's a lot of B names. And obviously Beth.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that I'm kind of almost wanting like scenes with a lot of her like positive influences interacting, not just Benny and Beltic, everyone who we've talked about who is positive with her, because. And it's weird to think about a show like this and think about, I need the Avengers to assemble. But I'm almost getting a little bit of, I want the friends to assemble to save her kind of vibe from this. I want them to all, and not that they literally, in a real world sense, would have to be there together at the same time. But I almost want the influence of all the positive influences in her life to kind of culminate in, this will actually save the day. And the day in this case being her life and being her, like...
Yeah. There's almost like a temptation, like... For example, again, I'm not saying it's good, but like maybe the janitor is like died recently, and that's why her friends here is like say, hey, do you want to come to the funeral?
Oh yeah.
And like and all of her friends like come with her to support her, sort of thing.
Either that or he's the linchpin. He's the final one that needs to show up.
Yeah.
As the final guiding hand, the original influence in many ways.
Push her back in the right direction.
And it's not really. I know the original influence was her mother, who because I mean every episode has started with a little flashback with her mother, and I think the janitor showing up could be a very interesting sort of like the culmination of like this team. And I know it's weird to compare it to a superhero team, but I think the way I'm saying that is because it's made me really care about all these like positive influences in our circle in her life. That I feel like, yes, the idea that people around someone who is like mentally ill or has mental health issues or depression or addiction issues, and the idea of them circling around and forming the support group that will ultimately give her the strength to fight this on her own is the potentially very inspiring story. So I guess what I'm saying is Queen's Gambit and the Marvel Cinematic Universe are basically the same thing.
One's much more interesting than the other, but I agree fundamentally.
I guess what and this is a more serious point, I guess what I'm really saying is that you can take any story or any two stories, and even no matter how different they are, and you might be able to boil them down to the essentials and make them sound the same.
I mean, that goes back to like there's like I think there's only really 7 stories.
Something
right?
like that. Yeah. But yes, but they never saw Human Centipede, so
I hesitate to call that a story.
There's a story.
Allegedly.
There's a story. So there you go. That's episode 6 of Queen's Gambit. So we do have one more. We have the finale, which we will get to quicker than we got to this one. But again, tech issues and work schedules got in the way. But we'll be back soon with the finale. So hopefully you enjoyed our rambles with this one. And we will see you next time. So you can, of course, let us know in the comments what you thought of the episode. You can like and subscribe. Very important on YouTube. It is the way that YouTube gauges success and shares us out to more people. So it'd be a big help if you do that. And it is obviously the completely free option. If you feel like being a little less free, that's a weird way of saying it, but go to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and you can support us financially for as little as $1 per month and help keep all the content coming. And it is what ensures that we survive. Well, I survive. I don't really mind if Connor doesn't survive.
That's why I have a job.
So, thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?